All right, so now we're gonna talk about some suicide myths and facts. First of all, this statement talking about suicide is a bad idea and may be interpreted as encouragement. So we know that those at risk for suicide do not necessarily want to die, but do want help in reducing the pain they are experiencing so that they can go on to lead fulfilling lives. There is a lot of ambivalence surrounding the desire to take one's own life. And by recognizing this and discussing this, we can help the suicidal person start to recognize alternative options for making their suffering. Often, suicidal people are experiencing intolerable emotional pain, which they believe to be unrelenting. They often feel hopeless and trapped. By helping them to recognize and explore alternatives to dying, you are planting the seeds of hope that things can improve. Given the widespread stigma around suicide, most people who are thinking about suicide don't know who to talk to about it. Rather than encouraging suicidal behavior, talking openly about what is going on can give them other options or the time to rethink their decisions. The second one is once someone is suicidal, they will stay suicidal. Hiding suicide risk is often short-term and situation-specific. While suicidal thoughts may return, they are not permanent. Someone who has experienced suicidal thoughts or attempts can go on to live a long life. The third one, someone who is suicidal is determined to die. Suicidal people often feel an overwhelming sense of distress and want this to end. When people are suicidal, they are usually feeling alone or like they are burdened to others and are in need of emotional support. Access to support at the right time can prevent suicide. Four, people who talked about suicide are not always intending to take their own life. A significant number of people contemplating suicide are experiencing severe anxiety, depression, and hopelessness, and may feel that their only option is to end their own life. Five, most suicides happen without warning. Most suicides are preceded by verbal or behavioral warnings signs. Some suicides occur without any obvious warning, but it's important to understand what the warning signs are and look out for them. Find out more about the warning signs will be a very good idea in this case. Six, only people with mental health conditions are suicidal. Suicidal behavior indicates deep unhappiness, not necessarily a mental health issue. Many people living with mental health issues are suicidal, and not all people who take their own lives have a mental health issue. So those are, in general, the most of the time the people may wrongly think because they don't know exactly what suicide is. But I think clarifying those, myths, we can actually create more awareness. And it really makes us think that when we hear some comments out there in the community, we can actually start talking openly about this situation, the suicidality and suicidal thoughts. It's important to start opening that conversation. Now let's start looking at some risk factors. One of the main ones is a prior suicide attempt. It's a high risk factor. So individuals who have made prior suicide attempts are much higher risk of dying by suicide than individuals who have not made prior suicide attempts. The other factor is mental illness, for example, like depression or schizophrenia. We see more high risk of incidents. A sense of hopelessness or helplessness. This means that you believe your life or current situation won't improve, which ties with the, Dr. Joyner's theory, where the person just feel hopeless and they don't think they will, improve in any way. The misuse of alcohol or substances, chronic long-term physical pain or illness as well, trauma, for example, violence, victimization like bullying, childhood abuse or neglect, suicide by a family member or a friend, events that affect multiple generations of your family. Other factors that can increase the risk of suicide include significant loss, including personal relationships, for example, divorce, relationships breakdown, social, cultural, financial, for example, job loss, as well as major life changes or stressors, such as unemployment, homelessness, poor physical health or physical illness, the death of a loved one, harassment, discrimination, lack of access to availability of mental health services, person identity struggles, sexual or cultural, lack of support from family, friends, or your community, and a sense of isolation. Now we're gonna watch a video that it creates or enhance the awareness of suicide prevention. All right.
Approximately 45,000 Americans lose their life to suicide every year. It's so important that we understand the signs and symptoms of someone that is struggling. Why we struggle so much in our society and talking about it is because people tend to put it in a box. And if it's not something that you're dealing with or something that someone you know is dealing with, then it's not something that you have to think about.
The ripple of their families being affected, like that's thousands more, that are affected by that, happening. So it's really sad, and it's shows we have some work to do to like bring more awareness and fix it.
It's heartbreaking. I don't think people talk about it enough. I don't think there is enough awareness.
I think the way to educate people is to start having open conversations, period.
My name is Teresa. This is my son, Josh. I lost him to suicide almost 4 years ago.
My name is Abby, and I've lost my mom and a dear friend to suicide.
My name is Erica, and I've lost a friend to suicide.
Regardless of how his life came to an end, he loved living. He was quiet. He was good. He was very good. He was a good man. He was a good dad to his little boy. He was a good son to both me and his dad. He came into my life when I was 16, and he was my everything.
19 at the time. And prior to that, I thought we had the perfect family. My parents were always the ones helping people with their house projects and coaching my volleyball. And I had my younger sister, and we had our issues. But whatever, it was something after my mom died, totally, it was like a huge slap in the face. Like, okay, maybe my life was not as perfect as we let on. One of my neighbors, his 15-year-old daughter committed suicide. So when I found out, I was pretty shocked. I didn't know her very well, and I didn't really know how to reach out to him. But I wanted to let him know I get it. So I sent him a text, and so he and I just really bonded over that, because his life, I don't think, was just ever the same after that. He struggled with work, with the guilt of, like he didn't see this coming at all. And then he killed himself about 1.5 years ago.
So some of the warning signs that you can definitely see that a person is struggling would be withdrawal, isolation. People that are maybe no longer doing things that they enjoy, being around people that they normally would be around, selling things that are valuable or giving things away that are valuable.
I would say I hear you, I see you, I want to listen. If you want to talk about your feelings, I'm here to hear them. I'm not going to judge you.
Tell them that you love them and that you care about them and you're worried about them, and what can I do to help? But you got to meet them where they're at with it.
Oddly enough, I think that part of it is because we have so much access at our fingertips, and that opens them up to increased bullying, increased content that's just negative, that constant negative feed, and the constant pressures. There's just so much pressure that it can feel overwhelming. I think the conversation starts at home.
Over time, hopefully it becomes something that people are more likely to talk about, more likely to recognize in themselves and in others, and then more likely to seek help for.
Because I hear people talk a lot about how somebody who makes that choice is weak. And I want to say to people, they're not weak at all. They've put up with whatever they've had to put up with, and they have dealt with whatever they were dealing with on their own for such a long time. They were tired. So they're not weak, and they're not selfish. They're anything but.
I work as a clinical care manager on the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That is a resource that is a national resource. So one of the great things about that resource is it's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Anyone can call that number and receive support from a live individual. And that's huge, because sometimes all they need is a listening ear. Sometimes all they need is to know that someone cares and is willing to take the time to listen.
You are not alone in whatever you're feeling and whatever you're facing. You don't have to face it alone. There are people who love you, and whatever darkness you're feeling or seeing, there is light somewhere in there, and we can find it together.
If that's you, if you're in need of a listening ear, please reach out for help. There's somebody there that wants to help. – 45 struggling. Why we struggle so much.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, for some reason, one moment, please. Just gonna do this to change the slide. All right. So let's talk about some warning signs. As we saw in the video, there are some noticeable warning signs. One of them is threatening to harm or end one's life. So definitely being aware of if the person start talking about death or dying, and that's unusual, that must be very important to pay attention to. Seeking or access to means, for example, seeking pills, weapons, or other means. Evidence or expression of a suicide plan. Expressing, writing, or talking ideation about suicide, wish to die or death. Hopelessness, as we saw, that's very important, an important indicator. Rage, anger, seeking revenge, acting reckless, engaging in impulsivity and risk behavior. Maybe they are increasing also in, as we see here, increasing or excessive use of substance. It could be drugs or alcohol. Expressing feelings of being trapped with no way out, withdrawing from family, friends, and society. Like, for example, from work, they take more days off from work, or they have absence at work. They don't want to wake up, they just stay in bed. Those are some signs. Anxiety, agitation, abnormal sleep, too much or too little, dramatic changes in mood, expresses no reasons for living, no sense of purpose in life. So this is from Ruth in 2006. Now, the greater number of warning signs is the higher the risk. So if it's very high risk, what we need to do is actually seek for immediate help from emergency or mental health professional. Now, if you receive a call or you're doing an intake or your client is coming and is telling you, I want to die, I want to kill myself. So definitely at this point, it's important to do a risk assessment. So we have the form. Later on, we're going to look at the form and we're going to talk about it. But you're going to actually do an assessment, and then you can take the steps. If this is, if you need to call 911, well, it's because it's a very high risk. If it's a high risk or a medium risk, seek help from mental health professional. That means if you, after you doing the suicidal risk, you determine that this person needs to seek for, to go to see a psychiatrist and mental health. So then you have to refer them, or you give them the information so that they can go to the hospital and seek for support. But if it's a low risk, we usually recommend counseling and to monitor those signs, right? You actually can be providing the counseling, just that safety space where they can talk. And the other thing is to create a safety plan. Now, next, we're gonna watch a video from Dr. Mary Jo Bolton. She actually works in the Clinic of Community Health Center, and she's the Director of Counseling Services, the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention, CASP. And she has some advice that I think it's very important. Let's watch the video. Now, because of the time, we're just gonna watch until the point where we're gonna use some of her strategies when we are doing the risk assessment. Okay, so we're not gonna watch the whole video. You can watch it at home, but we're just gonna watch a small part of it.
Hello, and thank you for taking a few minutes to join me today. My name is Mary Jo Bolton, and I'm with the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention and Clinic Community Health Centre. Today, we're going to talk about suicide and suicide prevention. It's not easy to talk about suicide. It can be very uncomfortable, but it's an important conversation to have. Potentially anyone can be suicidal. It's a part of the human condition when we suffer to consider suicide. It's not a weakness, it's not a character flaw, it's not crazy. Fortunately, most people who have thoughts of suicide don't act on them. Perhaps your life has already been touched by suicide in that you've lost someone, or you've supported someone who's bereaved by suicide. So you know that finding a way to reach out and talk to someone who you are concerned about, how critically important that is. Suicide can affect the very young to the very old. Someone who has a lot of money or very little money can be suicidal. Sometimes people who have all kinds of love and support around them can still feel that sense of despair and hopelessness. You might know of someone who's died by suicide who seemed to have everything, people that love them, purpose in their life, and yet they were overcome with hopelessness and were suicidal. Even though anyone can potentially be suicidal, there are certain groups that have higher rates of suicide and so are at greater risk. For example, youth between the ages of 15 and 30. Men have higher rates of suicide than women. Inuit, Métis, and First Nations young people have higher rates of suicide. You might be surprised to know that older adults have higher rates of suicide than young people or children. Suicide is complex and there's no one single cause. It's the interaction of many factors that can contribute to suicide. Things like depression, addictions, trauma, childhood abuse, poverty, sexuality and gender identity issues, marginalization, social isolation, mental illness. Many factors can be things that contribute to someone getting to the point of being suicidal in their life. Simply put, regardless of all the factors that may contribute, the theme with suicide is tremendous psychological pain, and that despair and hopelessness take over and envelop the person's sense of hope for their life being better or different. It can be terrifying to think that someone you love could be suicidal, a parent, a sibling, your partner, your best friend. It can also be scary to ask about suicide. It's important to know, though, that talking about suicide doesn't suggest it to someone, it doesn't plant the idea. What it does is communicates a willingness and an openness to talk about it. The more open and calm and direct we can be in asking about suicide, the more likely someone is to be able to share those feelings with us. They don't have to carry them on their own if we show a willingness to talk about it. When we ask about suicide, what we communicate is that we're open to talking about it, that it's okay to talk about it. And I think it's even important to have conversations with friends and family about suicide before someone is in that kind of distress. It's important to have conversations about how do we cope when life gets really difficult? Where do we find support? What's out there? What resources do you have inside and outside to call upon and rely on when life gets very difficult? So these are conversations we can have even before things get so intense when someone becomes suicidal. Talking to your friends and family, your children, about how we cope with stress is very, very important. Talking about what gives life meaning and purpose, even when times are tough. It's important to know what the resources are for you and your family in your area when you're struggling. It's important to talk about who would you reach out to for help if you felt like you were having thoughts of suicide and were worried about yourself. These are important conversations to have, and open conversations we can have that can make a world of difference in your life or in the life of someone that you love. So what are some of the signs and behaviors to look for when someone that you care about might be considering suicide? There's a phrase that describes this. It's a way to organize our thoughts around this. And it stands for, is path warm? So in this phrase, the I stands for ideation, meaning suicidal ideation, when someone is having thoughts of suicide and they may be talking about wanting to die. S stands for substance abuse. If you start noticing someone is using or abusing drugs and alcohol, this can be a warning sign that they're having trouble coping and are in some distress. P stands for purposelessness, when life seems to have no meaning or purpose. A can stand for anxiety, when someone seems to be very uncomfortable in their own skin, agitated. T stands for trapped. Now, this may be someone's perception of their situation, which is very real, that they can't see a way out of their situation. They can't problem solve their way out of it, and so they feel trapped in it. H stands for hopelessness and helplessness. W stands for withdrawn. You might notice someone stepping away from the people they care about or the activities that they used to enjoy. A stands for anger, agitation. You might notice someone not being themselves. They seem irritable and out of sorts. R stands for recklessness. You might notice that someone is behaving in a way that they don't seem to care about whether they're safe or whether they get hurt or not. And M stands for mood changes. Some things to watch out for might be signs of depression. So a loss of appetite, someone sleeping more than normal or being unable to sleep. They seem to have a flatness about them, and they're not enjoying the things that they normally seem to enjoy. When you start noticing these things, that's when it's an important time to start asking questions, to sit down with a person that you care about and find the words to ask. What's most important in these conversations is that you be calm, you be direct, and you be authentic, be true to who you are and what the relationship is, finding your own words to convey your concern. It's important also to communicate.
Okay, so we're going to stop the video right here. As I say, I'm just going to put the link on the chat later on, and you can watch it later. Okay, so as we learned from Dr. Bolton, you can actually, immediately when you think about warning signs, use the is path warm so that easily you can start doing your assessment when you are talking to your client. If you want, I will give you a time to just take notes about this, or you can also take a picture. Okay, so there are some additional warning signs. For example, increase of substance, alcohol or drug use, no reason for living, no sense of purpose in life, anxiety, agitation, unable to sleep or sleep all the time, feeling trapped, like there is no way out, hopelessness, withdrawn from friends, family, and society, rage, acting reckless, dramatic mood change, and etc. And also giving away prized possession or seeking long-term care for their pets. I do have a client who was suicidal, and she told me that she was about to, she didn't write a note. She has a kid, a 5-year-old, but she was okay. She was thinking that her child will be okay because he has a wonderful dad, right? And so she was about to take those pills that she gathered when she saw her cat jump on the table, and then suddenly she thought, who's gonna take care of the cat? And actually that was the reason why she didn't commit suicide at that moment. So we see that if the person has a reason to be living or to being here in this world, then that could be sort of like a prevention for them to act upon their thoughts. Now let's watch this video about Ashley's story.
I didn't know anyone else was going through it. I thought it was just me feeling this way. I started to have these dark thoughts when I was around 9. And I remember sort of this darkness, this dark tunnel, and not a shed of light that came with this thinking. And I had no idea why I was thinking it. And as a child at 9 years old, especially in that time, there was no answers, there was no knowledge, there was no awareness. So there was no understanding in my own mind of why am I thinking these ways? Why am I waking up and not wanting to be here anymore? Why am I refusing to fuel my body with food? Why am I refusing to sleep? Just refusing to live? You know, when I even tried to relay what I was going through, it was seen as an imagination, especially at that very young age. A lot of things are sort of labeled as imagination, and something that, you know, and also I was expressing all these emotions as well of anger and sadness. And from then on, I pretty much shut down at talking to anybody, telling anyone what was going on in my own head. At that point, I blocked myself out from the world of anyone around me knowing anything about what was truly going on in my own head. It wasn't until after my 21st when I experienced just an absolute explosion of bottling up everything. And the last thing that I remember is total numbness before I basically woke up in hospital. And that feeling was just immense fear of what just happened. You know, I felt pain, I felt hurt, I felt just in a state of fear that I met someone that changed my life. He became my psychologist, and he showed me just a whole new light to what support, compassion, and kindness feels like. He gave me a reason to believe and hold on to the hope that there is a better life, that you can heal, that this doesn't have to be my life where I'm bottling everything up and going through consistent depressive episodes and anxiety, and that there is just no way out of it. He helped me down the path to realizing that I can live and be happy. That experience, the moment that I actually just let it all out and do what these sessions were needed, I felt those really heavy weights just lift off my body, not even just my shoulders, my body. I felt lighter. My mind felt lighter. It's like all these years of holding on to all this pain and trauma were finally starting to lift. I started with small things, really small things, but they were actually big things in reality because they started off the process. Like, I just get out of bed. That was the start of it, getting out of bed. And then when I felt that I could continue to the next step, I'd make my bed. Even if I got back on my bed, it didn't matter. The fact that I got out of bed and I made it was an accomplishment for me, especially me being outside and just breathing and remembering that I'm safe and reminding myself that it's okay. And I thought, well, this has happened to me. This is a part of my life. This is my story. I'm going to use it to benefit and to try and help guide others as well. It definitely has led me to this path of wanting to be a school counsellor and wanting to be that person for others that I never got, and be in that place that caused me the most trauma. Be there for other children so they know that they're heard and that I believe them and that they're validated and that it's not just their imagination. This is not just something that they've just thought up. This is how they're feeling, and that's fine. That is okay. I would definitely relay the best way to anyone that you can truly get through this, even at the time where it feels like you can't. And trust me, I've felt many times that there is no way that I'm going to survive through those huge mountain climbs. But that's the thing, is that through this journey, you shock yourself when you actually can, and you get up and you use the hope, that bit of hope that I was talking about in that fight, and you just push yourself through it. Even if you fall down, it doesn't matter. You will fall down. You just need to sit down for a while, and that's fine. It's in your pace, but you keep pushing through for you.
Okay, so I like that. Keep pushing through. I think that's very powerful. Later on, I really recommend you to check that website, the Beyond Blue. They have a lot of resources there that can be useful for you. All right, so let's continue with our presentation. Now let's talk about the conditions for suicide by Dr. Plonsky. Um, so if we can efficiently and accurately understand suicide risk in terms of 4 factors, if we understand someone's pain, if we can understand their hopelessness, that things are getting better, their connectedness, this will be the extent to which that they not only have value connections available to them, but they are actually able to engage with them, and the capability for attempt suicide in that moment when we need to access or to assess that risk. So pain and hopelessness, and then I'm just gonna show you this table. So we actually have 4 columns about the 4 areas where we actually have to be always aware: pain, hopelessness, connectedness, and capability, which we already explained the model. And so pain and hopelessness, one of the hardest questions that people may have to answer is, how come if we are wired to avoid death, stay alive, to avoid danger, pain and injury, and to survive, how is it that the same humans take their lives? We are deeply behavioral creatures. We avoid pain and learn that if I get hurt by something, let's say someone got burned by doing something, they learn not to do that again. So if someone finds life miserable and painful, then they are going to avoid that pain by dying. Humans, we are not only behavioral, but we are also thoughts. And here is when hopelessness enters. If the person can see a better future and hope that things can get better and feel better, then they are wanting to avoid living. If the person becomes hopelessness, life is adverse, then they will start thinking that maybe life is not for me. In experiments where why punishment stop people to engage in certain behaviors? The answer is always anything that is adverse. For example, electroshocks, loud noise, social exclusion, etc. Pain and adverse is different for different people. Mental illness, financial hardship, relationships, also physical pain, chronic medical conditions, anything that makes life adversive is going to trigger this instinct that we don't want this anymore. And when this is paired with hopelessness that we don't want or we don't have a way out, that's when we start to be suicidal. When pain and hopelessness push you away from life, connectedness is what pulls towards life. If they maintain connections, they will increase the hope that things are going to get better. It's not worth or it's not worth it to leave, church, work, animals, etc. So even for people who feel suicide is fearful, is a fearful experience. In self-injury, abuse, increased capability. Adolescents who do, for example, think that Tylenol is lethal and not ibuprofen, if they don't know that actually ibuprofen, it's in greater doses is lethal, they won't be able to commit suicide. So understand the pain is also something that you will keep them, keep them alive. So one of the things that he also mentioned is that we do have this theory, we do have this model, but we actually cannot predict the future. So we cannot predict the future. So we hope that with these, enlightenings or these ideas can support our clients, but we don't know what will happen, right? What can we get from this information? Well, this information will give us an important snapshots of someone's suicide risk, will give us a broad categorizations of suicide risk. Any prevention will succeed if we target or impact one or more of these factors. For example, reduce pain, reduce hopelessness, and increase connectedness, and reduce capability for suicide. We can do it in so many ways. For example, in counseling, medication, safety plan, will help protect against capability. Crisis lines, 911, community, schools, etc. So as we can see in here, those areas where you can, we already discussed all these areas, but just having this table, actually, I recommend you to have it, always handy when you are doing your risk assessment, and look for these signs while you're doing the risk assessment, right? It's very important not to do the assessment very just thinking to answer those specific questions in the document, but also looking into the whole picture. So then there is some questions to ask ourselves when you are doing a suicide risk assessment. What can I do to reduce the pain of this person? What can I do to increase hope? What can I do to give them some sense of connection? And what can I do to reduce their capability? This is another pathway, another visual that it explains the pathways of risk. So we'll see here there are some genetic and psychological factors that play a part. This is This pathway is by Houghton, Saunders, and Connor in 2012. There are negative life events that can happen if we go this way. If there is no psychiatric disorder, then the person may start thinking, there is some psychological distress and hopelessness. There may be some suicidal ideation or pain alleviation as well. If we add into this the perfectionism and low optimism, then the person actually gonna go here in this area. Now, if we only have the genetic and psychological factors, but there is aggression or impulsivity, so the person will go here and actually is gonna be exposed to suicide or self-harm, right? So you see these three arrows can bring people into here, into exposure to suicide or self-harm. If there are methods or there is a capability, the outcome could be suicide in this case, when the method is lethal. And when the method is unlikely to be lethal, then the person will go to self-harm. Now let's look at this video about what can we say to a person who comes into our counseling session and is talking about suicide. Let's look at this video and then we're going to have some more ideas.
Ashley and Greg, take one.
Very nervous. It's our story. I know you have a lot of courage for reaching out.
It's inspiring, actually.
Thank you.
What shouldn't people say to you? You be grand.
Get it together and you'll be okay. Or you just be mindful, or to just think positive.
Tell them to snap out of it. Don't say get over it.
Walk it off, kind of,
You'll be fine.
You'll be fine.
It's
just
totally
a phase.
Fine. Yeah.
It's just a phase. They'll get out of it. You'll go past it.
Yeah.
Don't keep thinking that way because it's just going to make you worse.
Just get on with it.
Just get on with it.
Or saying they're weak, or they need to be stronger. Don't dismiss it and say, well, my life is hard too. So or there are people who have it worse off than you.
Or even the best one is you need to care about others more than yourself. And I've had that actually said to me.
Or snap out of it. Don't say it's all in your head.
You're not thinking of everyone else. So you need to think of your friends and your family, how they're going to feel. And
anything sort of dismissive is not, it's absolutely not helpful in any circumstance, really.
It's all in your head.
That's right. Yes, it is. That's the problem.
I just want someone to say, it's okay to be the way you are.
Sit with them with their thoughts and just show them that you're there for them and you want to reach out to them.
All I wanted was just for someone to actually listen. So they didn't actually have to say words, just to listen to me and understand what I'm saying is that I'm suffering. And I just want you to say, well, I'm here for you and you're going to be okay.
I wish I could get in front of the people in my life. There's been 3 in the last 3 years that have taken their own lives. And just let them know that even though they might have thought that people didn't care about them, and that life would have been better without their existence, that they're wrong, that they are valuable, and they're part of what makes this life so beautiful, and that, people want them to stay around.
Okay. So let's look at the next slide. Okay, so what to say? Ask the direct question, are you having thoughts about suicide? Be prepared that the person may answer yes. Then listen with empathy and without judgment. Keep asking open-ended questions, encouraging the conversation. For example, how long have you been feeling this way? You have felt this way before? Make sure the person knows you are here for them. Use nonverbal cues like eye contact, hand on their hand, nodding while they are talking. Let the person know that lots of people think about suicide and that it's okay to talk about those feelings. You are not alone. Lots of people feel like this. You can say, thank you for telling me. I'm glad you're telling me how you feel. Try to offer hope and suggest that people can find ways to get through tough times. I'm here, we can find a way to get through this. Reassure the person, friend or family that you or your client that you are here to listen and support them and that you don't need to rush off. Just take your time, there is no rush. I know talking about this can be difficult. I'm here to listen. You can tell me anything. Be prepared to listen, even if it's hard to hear, even if it makes you upset. Find out if they made a plan. This is important. People who have made a plan are at most risk. Have you thought about how would you kill yourself? Have you thought about when you will kill yourself? Have you taken any steps to get the things you will need to carry out your plan? And also remember to use appropriate terminology. Die by suicide, suicide, end his or her life. Took his, her life, attempt to end his or her life. What not to say? Well, don't try to talk them out of suicide by reminding them what they got going for them or how much it will hurt their friends and family. Don't try to fix their problems. Listen with empathy and without judgment. Don't dismiss it as attention seeking. Take them seriously and acknowledge the reasons they want to die. Avoid stigmatizing terminology. Committed suicide, successful suicide, completed suicide, failed attempt at suicide, unsuccessful suicide. All right, so let's look at this video as well of Jake's story from Beyond Blue.
You're slogging through thick mud and you look around and you see that people are just casually walking by. It feels like you're at an intense disadvantage that, you know, nobody else seems to be. So it's important for me to share this. I personally have a long history with mental health issues. I have struggled with suicidal thoughts for considerable periods of my life, and I have attempted to take my own life as well. My parents separated at 6, and then 5 years after that, my father was killed in a workplace accident. I did grow up quite a scared child, acting out in anger, because anger was the best way of feeling like I could take control of a situation that was rapidly becoming out of my control. My first reaction was that it was my fault. I was taking responsibility for something that was completely outside of my control. I grew up through my teen years, my adolescence, and into my early adulthood with that foundation of an intense resentment of my own existence, a real strong capacity for self-loathing, and a really low level of self-respect. I would have a lot of conversations with Mum about it. She believed that, you know, I romanticized the relationship that I could have had with Dad as opposed to the relationship that I probably would have had. He was a very absent father. I had to call him to come see me on my 11th birthday because he just didn't really have much of a regard for us, unfortunately. But I had developed a surrogate father figure in my mind. My idea of a father was quite corrupted and not exactly healthy. So everything that I did had to be perfect. It translates to my work today as a furniture maker. Everything has to be perfect. If you fail, it's because you didn't try hard enough or you didn't work hard enough. Everything that you do, it has a pointlessness to it. Shortly after I turned 18, when I, did make an attempt to take my own life, if this was all that there was to look forward to for the next 50, 60 years, I just wanted to check out. When you're in that headspace, it's just just feels like normal behavior. Again, everybody's normal is different. And when you're in that kind of headspace, trying to take your own life doesn't really seem like that much of an issue. It was a combination of not feeling like I had anyone to talk to and not feeling like my issues were worth talking about. I've been asked the question, what would you say to yourself at that age that you feel like you needed the most help? All I can say is that I wish I had someone there who made it more acceptable for me to talk about these kinds of issues that I was having. Emotions are a key aspect of the human experience, and we're so undereducated about them. The hardest thing to do was to ask for help, because it acknowledges two things. One, that, things aren't the way that you want them to be, and two, that they can be better. Everybody struggles. The best way to deal with it is to talk about it. I started finding how much of an impact it was having on my mum. I told her, I can't do this on my own. I do need help. Therapy for me, I wouldn't be here without it. Things are going to happen to you and things are going to happen around you. You have absolutely no control over whatsoever. The only thing that you have control over is how you respond to that situation. Self-forgiveness, for starters, was one that, I have to practice it daily. So if I make a mistake at work or if I make a mistake in a relationship, I have to, sit for a couple of seconds and say, look, this is not a reflection on you as a person. This does not mean that you're a complete and total failure. It means you're human. It means that you make mistakes, and that's okay. If I had checked out when I was 18, I would have missed winning an undefeated premiership. Even if it is the Division 3 reserves, it's still undefeated as far as I'm concerned. I would have missed my nephew and my niece being born. I would have missed the process of trying to become a firefighter unsuccessfully for 7 years and all the things I learned during that process. There's so much to hope for. Take it day by day. Just small things. That mindset might just change to maybe it is worth it. Maybe there is a reason to keep going.
All right, so let's take a 5 minutes break. I know we need to stretch our legs. So